reopen the meeting to hear submissions on the draft annual plan. And I'd like to invite, I can see Ryan Reynolds and anyone else from the Gap Filler Trust and Life in Vacant Spaces Charitable Trust, Ryan Reynolds as well. Is it? You all by yourself, Ryan?
All by myself, with support. So this
I
submission...
figured I recognised a lot of people there. So.
So this submission is formally on behalf of Gap Filler Trust and Life in Vacant Spaces Trust, but also with support from Greening the Rubble, who's represented here as well. First of all, just wanted to say thank you for your support and also congratulations. CCC has been very forward-thinking from my perspective since the earthquakes and the setting up of Rebuild Central, and in finding some new ways to enable some good things. In particular, obviously, we're interested in the transitional city activities, where Council was quick to establish some new protocols and seed funding for external organizations such as ourselves in order to support activities that are either too time-critical, difficult, or possibly risky for Council to deliver directly. And you might not realize, but for instance, one of the key people from Rebuild Central was recently headhunted by the CEO of Adelaide City Council and now leads a new placemaking team over there, facilitating exactly these sorts of activities. So CCC is developing a reputation here. Certainly don't envy the task of the new council. We understand it's very difficult to have to do everything simultaneously, but also prioritize. Broadly, this submission is just arguing the value of the transitional city activities and pointing out one area where we think collectively we can do better than we have. A bit about Gap Filler and Life in Vacant Spaces. In previous submissions, we've focused a bit more on our sort of broad accomplishments. I don't want to belabor that, but a brief overview, especially for the new councillors. So in the last 12 months, we have done or enabled 90 projects in the city on 38 different sites, and have around 30 active projects right now at this moment. We've worked with 10 schools, including developing some curriculum. There have been more than 40 companies involved in our activities. More than 25 organizations and 12 small businesses are directly aligned with specific projects that we have. We've had more than 500 volunteers giving 2,500 hours, given around 60 presentations to 2,500 people, and have had 100 plus kind of key media appearances, including New York Times, Deutsche Welle, and a few big ones there. So broadly speaking, this movement's doing a lot of good for the city. Experimenting, creating opportunities, and incubating ideas is hugely important right now. Give tourists reason to visit and give people reasons to stay in the city. Obviously, that's important as the recovery plan inevitably experiences some delays. But even if the recovery plan succeeds, since the plan's mostly focused on big-scale projects and it looks like small players are being priced out of the market, that a lot of artists, people in startups and innovation are terrified, and this movement is part of the support ecology for them in this city. And in the last 12 months, the transitional movement is gaining economic traction. There have been quite a few businesses, as I've said, supported by our projects, a few that have grown out of our organization and have even taken over commercial premises. Some things like the Pallet Pavilion, where the community activity there has supported a number of cafes, food trucks, and so on. More recently, we've had a number of projects in vacant shops in Cathedral Junction. We've now been asked to join the tenancy group there, so we're actually working actively with the commercial tenants there to make sure that our activities are compatible and are helping the property and the neighboring commercial tenants. And with the help of Tom Hooper from the CDC, we're now in conversations with Auckland, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, and Wellington City Councils, all of whom want to, in some manner, replicate the successes that Christchurch has had in this realm. So within at least some very small circles, Christchurch is seen as a sort of world leader here. In the short term, this transitional movement looks good, let's say, in spite of or in contrast to a general lack of progress in the city. But in the long term, we only look good if we contribute to a holistic and successful city. So we must make sure that our activities help the whole ecosystem of the city, and that's part of what this submission's about. Thus far, we're still entirely reliant on what's generally seen as property owners' generosity. So despite how many vacant sites and empty buildings we see everywhere, we still frequently struggle to gain temporary access, especially with guaranteed tenure of more than a few weeks. which of course severely limits the range of experiments that can take place and how much people and organizations will invest in these activities if, for instance, they might get given 2 weeks' notice at any time. So our suggestion is just that CCC undertake or commission a bit of research into incentivizing this sort of activity and or discouraging owners from leaving their sites and buildings vacant. So broadly, this would probably involve some sort of rates rebates for property owners who allow temporary use for public benefit. Obviously would require investigation into how to control and manage something like this, set the parameters, ensure some sort of cost cap is in place. But it's entirely possible that an organization such as Life in Vacant Spaces could act as a sort of filter there, or the threshold. Would also require analysis of the ratings unit database and some discussions about the cost of compliance, because I don't know the details of how the rates bills actually go out and stuff. But it's all possible. And this is happening worldwide where it's sort of a matter of course. A lot of cities are putting in place vacant property registration ordinances. So they identify owners of vacant properties and hold them to some minimum standards of care. I just want to run through a few quick examples overseas just to give a sense of what's possible. So in the UK, actually countrywide, full business rates are due on empty commercial properties. But if charities occupy a commercial property, they qualify for an immediate 80% discount on business rates. And actually the local government has the right to grant them the extra 20% discount. So charities are actually approached by retailers and landlords to take on a tenancy of a vacant building. Obviously good for charities, does raise some potential risks, won't go into now. Very recently passed in California was an Urban Agriculture Incentive Act, which allows cities and counties to designate incentive zones in urban areas. It allows landowners to get a property tax break in exchange for dedicating their vacant land to commercial or non-commercial agricultural use for at least 5 years. So it's recognizing that certain activities, such as agriculture, are absolutely unfeasible on very short-term sites, which is a current problem with a number of Christchurch projects like the Agropolis Urban Farm. Baltimore, similar thing, have rehabilitated vacant dwelling tax credit. So if you spruce up your old building and make it habitable for community activities, a tax credit there. They also implemented, which a few places have, vacant property receivership. So they actually take away the owner's right to demolish a building rather than restore it to use, and can actually claim properties for public purposes. Some cities go the route of disincentives. I'm not generally that way inclined, but there's a proposal in Wheeling, West Virginia, that if a property's been vacant for more than 6 months, you tax it at twice the normal rate, and if it's still vacant 6 months later, double it again, and so on, until there's no incentive for leaving your property vacant. Another possibility. And the list goes on. So the point is just that there is a lot happening out there to take inspiration from, and we reckon that someone needs to do a good cost-benefit analysis in Christchurch, including social benefit analysis, and make some specific recommendations here. So that's broadly our suggestion for how this movement can make the next step and start to, I guess, answer that question of what role these temporary projects can play in the longer-term future of our city. Thanks.
Gosh, my microphone was not turned on. Thank you very much, and can I just say thank you very much for what you do for the city. I spoke at a conference last week in Queensland and spent quite a bit of time talking about how a disaster was an opportunity to do things that you never thought you could do before, and how this transition had created new ways of doing business. There's a relationship between the creative artistic sector and the regulators, you know, us at the other end, and Europe. So I haven't seen you since I gave that speech, so thank you very much, because you're the reason, and the rest of the team behind you, that the New York Times and Lonely Planet even look at Christchurch at the moment. So you really are bringing huge benefit to the city, so it's an investment. Thank you for your submission. I've got Jamie, then I've got Andrew, and then I've got Tim and Yanni.
Thanks, Leanne. I think our mayor's hit the nail on the head. You know, and the fact is, you know, I class you guys as some of the heroes of the rebuild. So congratulations on everything that you've done. It makes us pretty proud to be Cantabs when we see the good work that you're doing.
Thanks.
I don't know if you're aware or not, just from going through the submission, but I proposed and had adopted by the council a full 100% rates rebate for any property owner that offers their property for a transitional city use in the city, and used examples of such as Gap Filler and the Life in Vacant Spaces Charitable Trust. So that was adopted last year. I proposed that, and that's been running for over the last year. One, were you aware of that? And two, aside from that, which we have adopted, is there anything else that we could be doing? Because of course, you know, you want the carrots, not the sticks, but we need to be incentivising this sort of great stuff.
My understanding, I don't know about what was actually passed, but the way it's been implemented in practice is that there is a small quick response grant fund, the Transitional City Grants Fund, that is managed by council, and from about 8 months ago or whatever it was, they said if projects are applying for funding from the Transitional City Grants Fund, they can apply for additional funds to support a 100%, like the equivalent of 100% rates for the duration that they're occupying that property. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, it's
Right. So it's somewhere, and how many projects have been funded through that each round? About 3 or 4? Yeah, so it's up to the person proposing the project, if they are applying for funding from that specific fund, to choose to include the rates amount in their application for funding. So
Okay.
it's...
So I guess, I'm sorry, I don't want to
No,
dominate.
well, you don't want to take any more time, so
So
otherwise
you're just saying it's
other
not
people...
working well enough there, so okay, that wasn't ever the
But we
intention.
obviously have to do a bit more work on that.
We do.
Andrew?
Yeah, just very quickly, referring to your last line on page 66, your recommendation that council undertake further research in this realm, preferably with our involvement. What would that model turned on its head look like if it was that you were to do further research with council's involvement? Clearly, I'm guessing there would be a need for some funding there, but would you have the capacity to take this as your project and have council support you in that rather than the other way around?
I would think so, yeah, absolutely. It would depend on timeframes and things, but certainly we'd be willing to do that. That's kind of the model that we did, or that Gap Filler did when we first proposed the establishment of Life in Vacant Spaces, was a few of us did some research, prepared a report for council, and council then seed funded that entity, so yes.
Tim, quick time for you.
I'd be interested to know your philosophy in the current, it seems that the current council philosophy with events is that big ticket items aimed at tourism, but we've seen that the small things that are intimate to the communities and to the city and give it vibrance are really what's important, and also what is important to tourists. I'd be interested on your feedback on that.
That could take a while, but broadly speaking, I mean, we see the need for both the kind of big ticket things that hit the New York Times, whatever, but also for the smaller things nestled in the community a little bit. We've been steered by the council grant funding, which requires us to do X number of projects within the city limits. So we haven't had as much activity in the suburbs as maybe we would have liked to. With Gap Filler, certainly at our last kind of annual strategy meeting, we've adopted a policy of locals at heart, so kind of putting more emphasis on that aspect, and I guess a bit less on the kind of big tourist attractions, yeah.
I think tourists are genuinely interested in seeing these expressions of identity, and I think the role that the small scale stuff does is also an incubatory role of actually allowing new ideas, and some of those might have a commercial component, but so they might cross between being business, arts, community, but they are really, really important, because there's elsewhere very few places where people can test ideas in a supported way.
Well, interestingly, it's you guys that were in the New York Times. It was the dancer mat that was seen with Prince Charles, etc. And it was the soccer area that on the corner of Hereford and Colombo Street that were making world news. It wasn't the big ticket tourist. So, there's I'm just kind of interested in that. So,
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you. So, no, that's, I'm afraid we've come to the end of the time. So, look,
Sure.
Thank you very much. Tremendous submission, and you've given us some great food for thought there.
Sorry, can we just get a list of things we agreed last time from the acting chief executive? Because I am concerned at Jamie's point, and I have previously asked.
Can we follow that up afterwards? We don't
Yeah,
want to take up
thank
people's
you.
submission time, so we agreed that we would follow that course of action.
I had one question. Is it okay, just very quickly?
No, because honestly, it's just, I really hate this process of having 10 minutes for groups and 5 minutes for individuals. I was an individual who arrived as a Member of Parliament for an area and was told by the Mayor that I had 5 minutes to present my case, which meant that I threw away my notes and answered questions. So, but thank you very much for making the presentation. I think we're going to have to rethink how we do these hearings at some stage in the future, because I think this process doesn't give us the opportunity to engage in the way that we'd really like to. Could I invite Rowena Watson to come forward?